this idea of shit hits the fan really caught my attention because it is very important. And I'll prefix this with the fact that I have a almost entirely digital wealth strategy now. That wasn't always the case. It was largely in UK equity and equally physical real estate. And I've shifted that over the last 5 years radically into Bitcoin. And you can't live in a Bitcoin. So I'm renting a house at the moment, and I've had a number of issues with renting over the last couple of years that audience members will have heard me complain about on previous episodes. But not owning your own shelter, being short shelter, has its own problems.
Mm.
But from a financial perspective, it's been a great decision because the purchasing power has rocketed since the major decision we made in 2022. And that's awesome. But it's like you still need somewhere to be. Like you have a physical meat body, and I have a young family with 3 kids and
Wow.
a wife being like, where are we going to live, mate? So when shit hits the fan, like, what am I going to do? I don't know, right? Really, if shit hits the fan. So I'd love to understand how you came to asking yourself that question.
Look, that's a good question, and it is largely tied to Bitcoin. And like, it's funny that you mentioned that you can't live in a Bitcoin. And what was his name? The politician Jared Rennick, who was otherwise relatively sensible, recently said you
He's
can't
been
eat
hammered, yeah.
you can't eat a Bitcoin, and he got roasted for that. As long as Bitcoin does what it's meant to do, that's great. You should always be able to buy some food and some housing. But if you bring it back to Ayn Rand's quote or comment, and I think it's out of Atlas Shrugged, which I have listened to, money is only as good as man's ability to produce the goods and services that you can buy with it. And so if people aren't producing the goods and services, your Bitcoin's not going to buy anything. And what actually got me to this place was there was something, I don't know what it was, but I could always just see there was something not right with the way our society was constructed, with the way culture was constructed. There's a part of me, we all have it in us. We all have like a built-in lie detector, right? It's kinesiological response that when someone's telling you a lie, you feel it, you sense it. But for this cultural lie that's so massive that everybody's going along with, it's a lot harder. But I could always feel it and I could always sense it. So I was like, okay, there's something not right about this. It's like a house of cards. This is pre-Bitcoin days, before I got the money piece. Something is not right. What if it all collapses? What does it collapse to? Well, you have to be able to source food, water, shelter, like they're the basics. And now I don't have a direct relationship with any of those things. So how do I start to build a relationship with my food, with my water, with my shelter? And then beyond that, it's your actual community and the people around you, the relationships with the people around you, because you can't actually do it all by yourself. So then it's building a bunch of relationships with people that are into that sort of stuff as well. And so, yeah, it's really been this prepper focus, although I never really had that at the forefront of the messaging or the marketing, you might say, for grounded permaculture. It was always just about this like reconnection thing and the ancestral thing. But it was when we were here at this property, when we've been living here for 6 years, and the owner of the property, because we're renting as well, the owner of the property, but it's values aligned renting. The owner of the property, he'd put a lot of time, energy, and money into this place and building community. But by the time we got here, he'd kind of given up on it and said, I'm just renting houses now and raising kids. And I said, that's fine. My model's based on renting. Let's do that and build a relationship. But after a few years after COVID, he didn't like what happened with COVID, so he left the country. And he came back and said, actually, I want to sell. I want to exit. I'd rather get the capital and put it into Bitcoin, right? At the bottom of that bear market. But it's a tricky property to sell. He wasn't sort of driven to put it straight on the market and boot us all out. He liked what we were doing, gave us some time to come up with this model to a company model to buy him out. And after the first incarnation of that, which we put together, was very feel good, very ideological, it was a little bit beyond its time even. And so what I did was after his feedback, he sort of said, look, Roops, I like what you're doing. If you change the messaging and the marketing to have more of a shit hits the fan focus, and I didn't even know what that meant at the time. I was like, what is this SHTF? And then I was like looking into it, and then I'm like, wow, there's a whole movement of preppers that are into this, that use this terminology. And he's kind of like that. And this is what he kind of wants. This is what he treats this place like, and another property that he's got in the country. And so I sort of had to sit with it, and I was like, do I want to start to integrate this into my messaging? Because it can be a little bit fear-based, right? And I'm like, I don't want to be about propagating this fear, like the system's going to collapse, you better get ready. But actually, when I sat with it, that is my motivation. It is actually at my core motivation of prepping for when that system collapsed. And I didn't know what the system was, but it's quite obvious that it is the fiat monetary system that is going to collapse. And it is collapsing like a slow-moving train wreck in real time. And I don't know if it's even collapse. It's like a hyperinflation, right? That's what it is. It's like an expansive collapse. So that's kind of the motivations and the decision making behind it. So I was like, I've got to get to truth. I need to get to something where there no middleman can get between me, where no one can like be, stealing my efforts, right, of work as well. So when I put work into the earth, and if I do it in sync with the seasons and the cycles and nature, it works. I get exponential returns on my efforts. It's amazing. It's so amazing. So that's kind of the logic and the decision making behind it. Yeah, to build something real and true, and in alignment with nature and reality and life.
I will give another kind of personal moment which hammers home why this is important. But my first year living in Australia full time, having emigrated over from the UK, my wife's Aussie, we moved to Melbourne, which is where she grew up, and I was in St Kilda, and the COVID lockdowns all happened. My first child was born July 2020, and over that 24-month period, we were effectively under house arrest.
Yeah,
and because
man.
of our decision not to get involved in the medication that was then pushed, we were in a form of medical apartheid. It was an extraordinary experience in which none of the populace had any guns. So the police, they rode roughshod over everyone. And this isn't a podcast hammering home how horrible lockdown Melbourne was, but it was brutal. But I remember so clearly, it's like I owned a house, but I had this one situation where when I walked out of my front gate, the government owned the pavement. And on the end of my street, there was a school. And at the time, they had all of these rules about getting tests to go interstate travel, overseas travel. And there was a COVID testing center that was constructed in the car park of the school. And there was a queue of people, the entire street, waiting to get COVID tests. And they would stand right at my doorstep.
Whoa.
And you're like, what the fuck? This is a family neighborhood. Like, are these people sick? I don't know. But equally, get the fuck off my door. Like, what the fuck? And you'd go down and you'd talk to these morons that are pumping out these tests, and they're like, call the Department of Health. And you're like, oh my God, well, that is going nowhere. But first of all, it's like, you have a piece of paper that says you have 195 square meters of land. But if they choose to put a testing clinic on your doorstep, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. Equally, where's the water coming from? Where's the food coming from? Like, I was forced to ask these truly fundamental questions that
Wow.
I've been able to not consider, given the way that the fiat system kind of does work. You know what I mean? It's like just good enough to keep you involved. And that was obviously a big moment as well, where I'm like, I've owned Bitcoin for 5 years, and suddenly companies are taking it on the balance sheet, and I'm locked in my house, and the relevance of it just like,
right.
And that was when the deep dive really began.
So you first got into Bitcoin 2015, and then the deep dive really with the COVID stuff triggered you to go to the bottom of the rabbit hole.
Well, it was mainly the money printing that happened. It was oh my God, like they've just put 30% more dollars in the system. That's insane. How, like, none of these other assets are keeping up. It doesn't make sense. But and so my allocation of my time went from a very small fraction focused on Bitcoin to being as much as possible.
Yep.
and my money slowly followed. So that great phrase of like, where your mind goes, your money
Right.
follows.
For sure.